And if you have your books with you, good morning.
Good
Just pull
morning.
those up. All right. Okay, we're now recording. Good to see you all. All right, let me share my screen. Make sure I can get it. Okay, students, let's look at our calendar because we are moving towards the end. Okay, so if you're like me, if you need to write things down in your calendar or things, you could do that. Number one, if you haven't done so already, please make sure that you complete the class survey. There was a class survey. I don't send it, but it comes from the school and it'll be sent to your school email address and you can complete that. All right. Today, excuse me, this week, we're in week 7, okay? Week 7. And we got one more week left, y'all. Week 7. Today, we're going to be in chapter 2 of Dr. Costen's book. And you do not have a discussion post for this week. But what you do have for this week is a longer assignment, which is a case study. And let's talk about that, a case study. So in the worship case study, you're going to choose one particular topic for your assignment. You're going to do either 1, the case study on burials or funerals, or 2, the case study on weddings. I should say weddings, not Christian wedding. So in case study 1, you're going to compare or in contrast a Christian burial or and funeral practices with another religion. You can pick the religion. It could be Buddhism, it could be Islam, whatever you want to do. 2, or you could select 2. The weddings, I should put weddings. You're going to compare and contrast Christian wedding practices with a wedding or marriage ceremony, should I say, of another religion. You can find that religion, you could choose whichever one. And you're going to say, what are the thing about worship practices and when we talk about religion, sometimes I don't want to give it away, but some things we will find that are very, very similar, and then some things that are different and really open our eyes to just different practices that other groups of people do or other religions do. Okay, now remember, your assignment is going to be at least 2 pages, double space, make sure it's double space, and clearly define what's done in the Christian burial or the Christian wedding, and what's clearly done in the other religion burial or funeral or the other religion marriage practice. Okay. Make sure that you include your sources. Okay, sources outside of yourself is fine, and make sure that you have at least 2 sources in your paper, and that's at least 2 pages double space. You can have more, but at least 2 pages. So once again, for those people who are watching, am I recording? Yeah, for those people who are watching the video and you're here with me today, we are in week 7. We got one more week left and we are wrapping it up. So make sure that you turn in your case study. No discussion post for this week. Case study. Case study will be due on Tuesday. Sorry, y'all. Will be due on Sunday. Can't get my words out. Sunday night at 11:59 p.m. Next week is week 8, and which is our final week. Let me go back here, and I tried to squeeze as much as I could into this semester. So week 8 is our final week. We got to get it all done next week. Next week, we're going to meet for our final time on Wednesday, March the 1st. We're going to be in Costen's book, chapter 3, when we talk about worship in the invisible institution. I want you to read that. And then we have a little bit I want you to read in chapter 4. Make sure you're following your syllabus. We're going to talk about ring shouts next week in our last meeting. And there's going to be 2 last things for next week, y'all. Next week's going to be it's going to be a little packed. You're going to see next week, you will have a worship research paper due on the 4th of March. And y'all got to make sure you get that in on time. I can't take anything late because I got to turn in grades. I believe it's the 6th of March. Okay, so your worship research paper, worship research paper is going to be found in week 8. And this one, we are going to, let me see if I can make this a little smaller. All right. I want you to go to chapter 5 in Costen, and you're going to, we're kind of in the area of weddings and marriages again, but comparing and contrasting slave practices of weddings. And you're going to find your information and you're going to find some help on chapter 5 in Costen's book. You can also give the history and the history of Christian marriage, and you're going to see that also in chapter 5 in Susan White's book. Okay. All right. In your paper, with that focus on, Christian marriage and how it was carried out in biblical times, you can share the issues and practices that you find that were related to slave marriages. Slave marriages. This paper should be at least 3 pages, double spaced, and make sure you include all your citations and a works cited page. Okay. And also you can discuss any implications that your study brings, if you found anything interesting that your study brings maybe to marriages today. But I thought it was really interesting as we talk about worship in this last piece. I had to get something about African American and how did they perform weddings. I want you to do some digging and some research. What did it mean to be married in slave times? And I'm not going to give it away, but I'm sure those papers are going to be very, very good, and it's going to open your eyes to a few things as well. Here's one additional thing before we get to our lesson today. Let me come back to you all because I can't see you. How do I get out of this? Now I can see you. Good morning, everybody. Here's one more thing that I want to add. We are missing, and this is my fault, we are missing to our syllabus. We need one more assessment. So I am going to have to add that to next week. It's going to be a quiz. I'll probably call it like an exam or something, because the school needs to make sure that you have your paper, you're going to do your research paper, but the school also, monitors our classes. So they need to make sure that we're doing a certain number of exams or quizzes. So I did see that I was short, and that was my fault, that I was short of a quiz, and I'm going to add that to next week. And that's going to cover what we have been, and I'll give you the chapters, what we have been covering in Costen's book when we talk about African American worship. Okay, so we'll be having that last quiz next week on Costen's book on chapter 1, probably 1, 2, chapter 3, and 4. Okay. So I know it's a lot. Y'all, we're getting to the end. And a few of you are getting to the end of it all. I've been working on some, yeah, I see you, Reverend Marshall, Miss Gloria, and Miss Janice, Mr. Bentley, Miss Carolyn, you're almost there. And Mr. Goff, you're almost there too. So I was working on your program worksheets. I hope that you got those yesterday. The days are just flying by, and it is so good to see you coming to the end of the road. It's sad to see you coming to the end of the road, but I'm happy that you're coming to the end of the road. Reverend Marshall said, yeah. But also just for an announcement, also for those students who are watching the video, just watch your emails after this class is over, because we will chat more about May and what graduation will look like, dates and all of that stuff, okay? Because we want to recognize you. This is a big accomplishment. All right. Now, I've been talking a lot. Any questions, comments? I'm going to be quiet for a minute.
Professor,
All right.
this is Marshall. We got our annual conference starting next week, starting the first. So I might not be in the last
Gotcha.
class, but my work will be done.
Gotcha. I totally understand. Yes, you are amenable to the conference. Yes. Thank you, Reverend. All right. We are going to go ahead and get started. If you have any other questions, you just let me know, and I'm going to pull up our lesson. I think this is going to be a good one today, y'all. We are, if you have your book, we are in Dr. Costen's book in chapter 2. Today, we are talking about African spirituality. Let's see if y'all can see me. I can see Reverend Marshall. Can you see my screen? Okay. Let me tell you something about this author. I met Dr. Costen. She also went to Johnson C. Smith University, and then she moved on, to seminary. Just a wonderful instructor, and I had the awesome pleasure of meeting her in person. So, like, how many times, do you meet an author of a of a text? And she's authored many books in terms of music, African American music in churches. So you can look up her name and find more information on her books as well. So I just wanted to say that. All right, y'all. Today, as we take this shift into Christian worship, we are going to spend some time talking about African spirituality. I have a video for you, African spirituality. Let's start right here, and then we're going to go to our video. So last week, we kind of opened it up with this concept of diversity and pulling in different things um, from our African ancestors into worship today. There's some things that um, Black churches are doing, or churches are doing, and that if we took the time to research and to go back, we'll see that those things are still being done today. All right, let's go here, and then we'll go to our video. I love this picture when I saw this picture on the right of these African worshipers in their beautiful attire of white. African spirituality, remember we talked last week and we said that our African ancestors came with a sense of spirituality already in them. And remember, we talked about the praise house and them having their secret meetings away from the masters to worship. Well, of course, the masters weren't telling them to worship, right? The slave holder wasn't telling them to go serve their God. Our ancestors had that already in them, and they leaned on that faith and they leaned on community to help them get through. Remember last week we talked about, we lifted up that scripture and just the notion of, how can we sing songs of joy in a strange land, and they're feeling like an alien. And remember we said that we're sure that they were feeling confused, alienated, sad, despondent, but faith and worship was the thing that brought them through. All right, everybody, let's look right here on the screen. I have up there on the top, worship helped them to survival. And so African spirituality of what they brought over with them helped our ancestors to survive. ATR, you want to jot that down. ATR, African, stands for African traditional religions. ATR stands for African Traditional Religions. And we talked last week, I believe it was. We talked last week. Y'all remember what were some of the notions that the slaveholders had of the Africans' religious practice? What did they think about their religious practices? Did did the slaveholder think that those religious practices were the same as theirs, or were better than theirs, or were on the same level?
Professor, they thought they were pagan. They,
Correct.
they did not accept them. They thought they were pagan, and it fit in with their narrative that Africans were not human. So they really had no positive to say. That's why they pushed Christianity, because they thought that was the only way to worship God.
Okay. And so let me deal with the first part. So the slaveholders, yes, did see, and of course Europeans, they did see the enslaved Africans mode of worship, how they sang or danced. They saw that to be negative or less than. It's different from ours. But the Africans simply brought what they already knew. Okay, and that was how they worship. And that's the thing. I love these type of classes because it helps us tell other people that it wasn't anything wrong with it. And I think also through the years, that notion of, and we're going to talk about it now, that notion of um, the African practices were wrong, they were bad, or they carried it with them, and it helped them to survive. It helped them to live. It gave them a sense of faith and family and community. And they already knew God. And so that couldn't have been bad. African traditional religions believed in, excuse me, they believe that the cosmos, or what the cosmos we would call a universe, a world, was sacred. And I think we talked about this last week, that everything was sacred. The animals are sacred. The trees are sacred. The people surely are sacred. Okay. And so that was the belief that they had, that everything had a purpose, but we can't treat people or things or the air any old kind of way because it is of God. Our slave ancestors were, excuse me, were able, I got a typo there, were able to build upon the African spirituality that they had already internalized. Okay, I would just want to pause right there. They already came with their African spirituality. They already had their faith. They already had their faith. And in order to survive, yes, they may have had to alter some things, um, change some things, but isn't it just awesome? Y'all remember the video from last week? Isn't it awesome that when they didn't have the freedom to worship like we can now, they still found ways to worship, even if it was in secret, even if it was in hiding, even if they had to subdue movements, they found ways to worship. So let's go here. I'm going to stop real quick and I want to pull up this video. You give me just a second. And this video is Professor James Small, and he's going to talk about, we're not going to watch the whole thing, and we're going to talk about what is African spirituality. What is African spirituality? And y'all let me know when you see him on the screen. You should see a man with a hat. He has a plant behind him. Okay. Now I'm not gonna we're not gonna watch the whole thing. It's about 9 minutes. I'll post this link in the chat and I'll post this in the in our D2L class so that you can watch the entire thing. But let's answer this question and absorb a little bit of Professor Small on what is African spirituality.
Dying. And I went home. And my grandmother.
Hold on, I caught him in the middle of a sentence. I want you to hear what he was saying.
What happens to the energy that is you? My grandmother was dying, and I went home. And my grandmother raised all of us, even though my mother and father was in the house. My mother and father were more like brothers and sisters. My grandmother and grandfather, they were the bosses. And then I had my great grandmother there, and she was even more of a boss. And so when Mama was dying, and Mama was a traditionalist, we call her root woman down in South Carolina. And so my mother called and said, if you want to see her, you need to come home quickly. So I jumped on a plane and I flew to South Carolina. And I got to her bedside. And she asked everybody to leave the room. So I said, oh Lord, what's going on now? And she told me, she said, James, she used to call me James. Because in a certain African language, you can't, the word J don't exist, so you don't pronounce it. So her J was a G. And she said, James, I want to go home. I said, well, Ma, you don't have to stay here. I thought she wanted to go back home to the house, you know. I said, I'll tell him now to take you home. You could die there. She said, oh, no, I don't want to go back there. She said, I want to go home. And then I got a little scared about it, but then I come out. She said, come take me up out of here. She told me to come and take that spirit out of my body and let her go. I was so scared, I did not know. I just was short of wetting my pants when I went. I remember putting my two arms under her arms, pull her chest around, I slid her back up on the pillow.
I'm not sure if you can hear. I think the audio's going down. Let me see if I can. Yeah, okay. Same thing on my side. Let me fast forward.
And she took a deep breath. And she was calm. She said, you could tell the others to come in now. And I did. And the next day I flew back to New York. And I called that morning. My sister, oh, after you left last night, Mama was sitting up there eating grits and catfish. And she was just having a good time talking about Pete and all of them. And while she's talking to me, Mama passed. We give that, sometimes we call it the ghost. That energy finds another being to reside in until it gets this new body. Or it could reside in your ecology because it's energy. You go back and merge with the greater force of energy in the total universe. But if you don't complete your journey because you're down here fooling around with all the negative and sliding and dotting, then you got to come back and repeat the process over and take your time. Is that?
Are you able to hear? It's a little low on my side. Okay, I see, Miss Gloria, you're shaking your head. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. It seems like his audio goes up and down, and I apologize for that, but
The whites took from that the concept called purgatory. If you study your history, it'll make the rest of the world so simple. It just make it all so simple. You know. You ever been in love? Girls, in the African sense, love is not loving your body or loving your looks or loving your personality. Africans love the God in them, which they have spent their whole life cultivating, meaning those Africans who are in our senses, because we're out of our senses both at home and here, thanks to colonialism and slavery, but we're coming back. It is the God in me that seeks the God in you because I know the God in me and thus I can recognize the God in you. That's what love is about. They make us think love is about the shape of your hips, the contours of your face, color of your clothing, the type of hairstyle, the smoothness of a personality presentation. Most people who present their personality is putting the best foot forward, and it's almost always false, you know. And all of us have been there. I thought I was in love so many times. So Lord have mercy. I know my passion and my love can give you the capacity to mate at that level and create. Every human being you know was created by human beings.
Okay, I'm gonna pause it right here. I'm sorry, his audio is low, but let's go back a little bit. I just want to touch on a couple of things that Professor James Small was saying. In the beginning of the video, we didn't watch the beginning, but he talks about African spirituality and how it was just so negative and it was seen as negative and like demeaning. And I fast forwarded kind of towards the middle of this little short clip, and he talks about just even going back to his grandmother, who was of African descent, and his grandmother, I think he said he was from South Carolina. I know it was hard to hear. He was from South Carolina, and the grandmother was there in South Carolina, and the grandmother reciting what was already in her, sharing her spirituality, saying, I want to go home. We've probably heard many of our ancestors say that, I want to go home. I've got a home somewhere. And not meaning, a brick and mortar house, but meaning a place over there, a place to reside, heaven, or how you want to call it, after this life is over. Professor Small also talked about towards the end African spirituality, believing in, yes, the spirit's going to leave the body and go to another place, and some of those aspects that we see from African spirituality moves and is the same or very similar in Christianity. Let me pull our lesson back up again. um, Let me know when you can see our PowerPoint come back. All right. All right. Right here, let's talk about, I love this picture up at the top, the lady in the yellow. Let's talk about African communication, music, and movements. And I'm going to see if I can find that video. I was supposed to find that video of the dance movements. But African communication is so important in worship. How do we blend the music? How do we blend the movements? And so the liberating word of God, or the preached word that the slaves heard, it freed them. It gave them encouragement, even though they were still in bondage, right? Despite its rich history, the continent, or the African continent, was described as lost or dark. I think we heard this earlier from Miss Gloria, that the colonial Christians thought that the Africans were heathens, that they were less than. And we're going to go to your book in just a second, just as we, and I don't want to get too much into the Christian history course, but we did see this in the Christian history when missionaries would go to what they called it the dark continent, right? Why did they call it that? But as they went to the African continent, they came back with these stories, and they did this, and they were dancing, and they did, because it was different. They were different people, in comparison to the European colonial Christians that came to do just that, colonize. And so African communication is about music, is about movement. Okay, let's keep going here. And so that was real different for them, right? Okay. I'm also in your book. I want to pull out something in your book in Costen's book. Now I'm on my tablet, so my page numbers are different, but in the book, there's a caption. It says Roots of African American Christianity. Not sure exactly what page number it is, but in this is chapter 2. And the caption says Roots of African American Christianity. And she says right there at the beginning of that section, she says, in spite of the ingrained traditional religious beliefs and customs of the descendants of African American worshipers, colonial Christians generally assumed, watch this, Africans to be ignorant heathens. That's what we said. This attitude created an impassable chasm between African and Euro-American worshipers, reluctant to share a message of love, of neighbor and freedom. The Euro-Americans shaped and dispensed a more convenient form of Christianity. Let's just pause right there. Um, and I think that it is through slavery, and even as we started to see the denominations form, this was one of the reasons why, because it was the enslaved ancestors were not free to worship the way they wanted to, the way that they felt in their soul, with the freedom of movement and music like they liked and enjoyed, because the Euro-American person saw it as, mm, you know, that's nasty or that's wrong. Excuse me. And we still get that today. Anybody want to jump in there? Any excuse me, everybody. Any questions, comments before we move on? Okay. I want to read this too before we move on to colonial America. It says, and I'm still under that caption under Roots of African American Christianity. The next paragraph, Costen says, in such an environment, the seeds of African American worship were sown. The slaves' reception of the gospel message and their understanding of worship were not as the colonists presumed they would be. The liberating word of God freed the slaves to respond in new, watch this, in new and creative ways in the midst of their human bondage. So isn't that awesome that you're not going to hurt me, but now I'm just going to find, well, physically they were hurt, but it didn't obliterate, it didn't eliminate the Africans' worship. It simply, if you see Costen's book, it gave them ways to respond in new and creative ways in the midst of their in the midst of their human bondage. Okay. Let's talk about African communities in colonial America. So we're moving forward just a little bit in colonial America. So now America's starting to move and expand a little bit towards colonies up and down the East Coast. Slaves, as you probably already know, were given these unfamiliar names. And of course, they did not come to America being known as Mary, or maybe being known as, here's some examples, Anthony or Isabella. They were given European names because it was easier for the slave master to call you John or to call you Mary, rather than your beautiful African name that they, didn't want to pronounce, or even probably, what's the word? They didn't want to pronounce it, or just didn't even want to accept it, you know. Reminds us of, y'all remember the movie Roots? Yes, go ahead, Miss Gloria.
I was going to say that it was common for um, conquerors to change the name of their captives. You find that in the Bible, where they changed their names to a Greek name or Assyrian name, whatever it was, they
Right.
changed their name. Because if you want to subjugate a people, you take away their name.
You take away their name, and the name for many of us is identity.
Yes.
You know, identity. This is who I am. When you call me this, or when I call you blah blah blah, the person is going to turn around, and there is pride in our names. Good point.
Also, Professor
Yes.
Marshall here, I think that it took away their power because their name means something in their native land. Strong man, strong warrior, a mighty
Yeah.
warrior. It means something way more, and that pride do come in. And so I think it took away uh, their strength when they took their name.
Yeah, I agree. Uh, and I know I don't want to go too far off on this one, but names mean something. Names are so powerful. And when you go back, look, we can open up any book of the Bible, right? And we see between either in the Greek or in the Hebrew, Old or New Testament, when somebody was given a name, you'll see next to it, it meant whatever. Um, even the name Jesus, we knew Mary knew what his name was going to mean. Anyway, and so even as we move through in African ancestry, in Jewish ancestry, the names given were given with a lot of thought, were given with a lot of meaning. And I don't want to get off on this tangent because we'll be on it for a while, but um this is just me, my personal thing. We just have to be careful of how we say it, y'all. What we name children, and giving or aspiring names with weight and meaning and glory to it. But anyway, that's me. All right. Let's get to this next part here. How we doing? Slaves and whites would worship together. Okay, they would worship together sometimes, and it wasn't always an issue with them worshiping together. But we know that it may not have always been glorious for our enslaved ancestors. It usually involved some type of separation in the worship experience. They would not sit together because, of course, the slave master or the wife or the children or something saw the slaves as less than human or something. So there was definitely a separation. As you start to move into uh, more, I don't want to say modern times, but moving towards the end of slavery, you see churches that are being built with balconies, and the slaves were subjected to being upstairs in the balcony, and the whites were downstairs. The communion was often denied to slaves. Communions were not, excuse me, slaves were not allowed to take communion. So that was a holy sacrament that was not offered to them. And I'm going to show you this as we talk more about, I know you can't see this, but I'm going to pull up this document as best as I can. Okay. As we talk more about worship and African spirituality, there were rules. And if you see on the right-hand side, I know you can't read this, and I'm going to pull up the document in just a second. It says rules for the Society of Negroes. And this was, you may be able to see the date. This was written, y'all, in 1693. 1693. African servants in the state of Massachusetts in 1638. Now, this is giving y'all some little tidbits for your paper. In 1638, they requested marriages and church memberships. Isn't that awesome? In 1638, our African ancestors were requesting from the church that, look, I want to be a member of the church, and we're requesting to be married. In 1693, where you see the paper, the document on the right, a group of slaves wanted to form their own religious meetings. Isn't that awesome? In 1693. And they came together and pulled together these rules, and I'm gonna pull up a document that you can read in just a second, these rules for the Society of Negroes. And this was kind of like their first rule book for worship. And if you all stay right there, I'm gonna pull up the document, okay? Let me see if I can pull this up. Uh-oh. Okay, let me see if I can pull up this document. Y'all still there with me? Let me know when you can see it on the screen. It's going to be a document. Okay. Reverend
Yeah.
Marshall, can you see it?
Yes,
Okay,
we
so
can see.
thank you. Everybody, this is so awesome. I'm going to put this document in our G2L page. I want you to just imagine we were living in 1693. This is what, 2023, 1693. And our ancestors came together and said, we want our own church. We want to get together in our own kind of way because we're tired of worshiping with y'all. You don't want us. So we're going to do it the way that we want to do it, and we know how to do it. I'm going to read just a few things here. I won't read everything because I'll allow you all to read it on your own. But this is what they say. We, the miserable children of Adam and Noah, thankfully admiring and accepting the free grace of God that offers to save us from our miseries by the Lord Jesus Christ, freely resolve, with his help, to become the servants of that glorious Lord. And it says, and that we may be assisted in the service of our heavenly master, we now join together in a society. So they were coming together to form their own kind of like church, their own thing, a, a society wherein the following rules are to be observed. I think this is just awesome. I'm not going to read all of them, but let's just highlight a couple. Let's look at number 1. It says, it shall be our endeavor to meet in the evening after the Sabbath. And so after the Sabbath, that'd be Sunday. Maybe they meet Monday evening. In the evening after the Sabbath. And what they're going to do? Can y'all see it on the screen? What are they going to do in the meeting?
Pray together.
Pray together.
By
Pray
turn.
together.
And taking turns.
Pray together.
Mhm. I heard somebody's a little muffled. I apologize. I heard somebody's a little muffled. Okay, somebody mute your microphone. I apologize. Okay. All right. One to begin. They said we're going to take turns praying. One to begin the message, the meeting, and somebody else is going to conclude the meeting with a prayer. And between the two prayers, what they're going to do? We're going to have a psalm shall be sung and a sermon repeated. I mean, so they have their order of worship. They had their order of worship in their prayer, excuse me, in their gathering time. So they know what time they're gonna meet. They're gonna pray together. They know who somebody gonna pray in the beginning, somebody gonna pray in the end, and we're gonna have a song and a sermon. Um, Like I said, I'm not going to read all of this, but I just think this is just so awesome. Look at point 2. Our coming to the meeting shall never be without the leave of such as have power over us. So, meaning that they were going to get some type of permission. We're just not going to act up because, of course, y'all, look, they're still operating under the powers that be. They're still understanding that we're not all 100% in charge here. And we will be careful that our meeting may begin and conclude between, okay, what time they gonna meet? Between the hours of
7 and 9.
7 and 9. Okay, they're gonna get up out of there at a decent time, and that we may not be unseasonably absent from the families whereto we pertain. So they're saying, look, if you allow us to do this, these are our rules, that we're not going to be gone too long, where we're not going to be doing our work for the families that we work for. I just thought this was just so awesome. How what was it, 1693, that they came together with this document. Um, so I'm not going to read everything. Let me see here. Oh, and 5. If any in our number shall fall into the sin of drunkenness or swearing or cursing or lying or stealing or notorious disobedience or unfaithfulness unto their masters, we will admonish him of his miscarriage. So they are, I'm sure, appealing to those, the higher ups, saying, look, if you allow us to get together, we're going to keep each other straight, and we're going to make sure make sure that they don't act up and go against the master as well. Look at the last one there. Like I said, I don't want to read everything, but they have a tool that's going to assist them in learning, and they're going to learn from the catechism. You see that? It shall be expected that everyone in the society that he learned the catechism. So that tells us, now remember, this is in Massachusetts, that tells us that these individuals are probably literate. And if not all of them are literate, there are somebody in the area, somebody in the assembly that can read, that can assist them with learning the catechism. Okay. And so I'm going to post this for you. I thought this was just so awesome that our ancestors, as we're talking about worship, came up with rules on how they want their worship experience to go. Okay, let's get back here so we got 10 minutes. All right. Hopefully I changed the screen. You should see our baptism.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Now, things were occurring so much um, during this time, and a lot of things were not recorded. So it is the first recorded slave baptism happened in 1641. Were baptisms done before that? I'm sure they were, but the first recorded one that we know of on record was 1641. An African slave woman was baptized in Dorchester, Mass, in 1641. These actions, we're sure, were not done easily. So the actions may have been done because of maybe some type of economic reasons, and I'm sure that is, as Costen says in her book, that it probably was not done because the masters just really were concerned about the slaves and their faith and their growth in the Lord. Costen in her research thinks that it could probably be more of an economic reason, maybe like a checks and balances kind of thing, or maybe perhaps also Costen says maybe kind of like a checking of their mind, kind of they knew what they were doing was wrong, but maybe if we baptized them, it may have made them feel better. uh, you know the Anglican Church baptized and admitted slaves as early as the 17th century. And in 1664, laws were relegated to African slaves to perpetual bondage and what we call durante vita. So it was now like, okay, are we going to be able to baptize you at all? Because listen, even during this time, the white slave master, so think about baptism. Baptism is a sacrament that was done, it's an outward activity, but it was an inward thing, meaning that you're washed, that you are accepting the Lord Jesus, that there's an inward change. But think about the whole context here. The the European didn't even think that the slave was human or had a soul, right? So there's a lot of, what's the word? Maybe hypocrisy that we see here, but the slaves themselves knew of faith and wanted to be and wanted to have this happen. Okay. Um, Let me pause right here. Let me come back to you all. Any questions, comments? I'm going back to our book.
Professor, I think, I believe history is very important to know, because you don't realize why you're doing what you're doing when you show the society rules. The first rule gave the order of worship. And for the most part, if you walked into a Black church in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, not now, you saw that order of worship. The hymns, the psalm, the sermon. I mean, you wonder where they get it from. They got it from somewhere. And you look at history, there it is.
There it is, right. They got it from somewhere. And isn't that awesome? That was what? 16. Remember that, y'all. 1693. That our ancestors came together and put this together. They said, look, we're not going to be gone long. Now we got to remember that 7 to 9. They said we're going to be out early. Now, sometimes we can go over and over, right? But they were knowledgeable of time, because they knew if they were gone too long, that would start a whole nother thing and maybe shut the whole worship experience down. Very good point. I had something I wanted to. Yes, okay. Like I said, I apologize. I'm on my tablet and my page numbers are a little bit different from yours, but this is going to be under the section of sociological context in Costen's book.
It's the next page.
The next page.
Page 18.
18. And I'm going to start at the paragraph. She has a paragraph that says laws as early as 1664. I don't know if you're able to see that. And I want to go back to that Durante Vita. I'm not sure if you see it on your page. The paragraph starts with laws as early as 1664 relegated African slaves to perpetual bondage. And that's called, say it again, Reverend Marshall.
Page 20 at the bottom.
Page 20 at the bottom, y'all. For those who are watching this video, go to page 20 at the bottom. Laws as early as 1664 relegated African slaves to perpetual bondage. In the Latin, that's durante vita. Virginia, state of Virginia, was first to enact a law that stated, in essence, that the conferring of baptism, watch this, y'all, that the conferring of baptism would not alter the condition of the person as to her or his bondage or freedom. By 1706, 6 colonies had legislated that baptism, underline this, was not a threat to a slaveholder's legal rights. Don't let it just make you mad. So I want y'all to remember that. If you're watching the video or you're here with me, put a little asterisk next to that. Make sure you know what durante vita is. In Virginia, remember what Virginia did. Virginia was the first to enact a law stating that this person, the male or the female slave, right, they could be baptized. It just make you mad reading it, but they could be baptized, but but it would not alter the condition of the person as to her bondage or freedom. So the slaveholder was being real slick, and you can see that they're convicted, but then want to put something in writing to say, we know what baptism is, right? It is a regeneration, and uh, uh, it's an outward thing that's done, but it's an inward washing, right? But they're even saying that, okay, but yeah, but you're still not free. Just because you want to be baptized, you're still not going to be free. You're still going to be a baptized slave. And then the other colonies follow suit. 6 colonies follow suit. If you see that next sentence, they follow suit and say, hey, we're going to pass these legislations that say, yeah, even though you're baptized, you still good. You can still hold your slaves, even if your slaves are baptized. So for the slave, I'm sure it may have been confusing um, to take these holy sacraments and thinking that they are something good and holy, but it didn't change their bondage situation. That just makes you mad. I want you to, we don't have time to read it right now. In the next paragraph there was a missionary. Goose Creek is not very far from where my dad grew up in South Carolina, but some of the concerns it says in the next paragraph were not limited to those who held slaves in bondage. Francis Lejeune, guess that is, a missionary in Goose Creek, South Carolina, provided the following declaration to which adult slave candidates for baptism were required to assent or subject themselves before they were baptized. And if you see in that little caption under it, these were some of the things that they had to do. Let me just read this. Okay, let me just read this and then we'll stop. Francis Lejeune, these were some of the things that they were required to subject themselves before they were baptized. He says, you declare in the presence of God and before this congregation that you do not ask for holy baptism out of any design to free yourself from the duty of obedience that you owe to your master while you live, but merely for the good of your soul and to partake of the graces and blessings promised to the members of the Church of Jesus Christ. So this particular right, Gloria, I see you shaking your head. So in this particular slaveholder's like, look, you may have seen baptisms in modern time where the pastor may say something before, or the candidate for baptism may say something. So just imagine we're way back in slavery time and your cousin is about to go down into the water and the slaveholder says, look, okay, you can get baptized, but just I want you to know that you're coming and you're coming to baptism for your soul, but it's not going to get you out of anything. Isn't that something? All right. All right, y'all, we're gonna pause right there. I see we're at 12:01. We could just, this chapter just it makes you mad, but it is so rich in history. Any questions, comments?
Miss Berry,
Yes.
um, I just want to say that I was raised in the state of Alabama in a small town called Troy. And I was raised up in a Pentecostal church. And the church was very small in the beginning. It has grown quite a bit. And there was another church near us, and they were Pentecostals, but they were Caucasians. And sometimes they would fellowship. I was very young, but I do remember this. They would fellowship with us, but when they came to fellowship with us, they would sit in service and just look at us. They would not engage um, in the worship, not really. They would just watch. And although my pastor referred to their pastor as
Uh-huh.
Reverend or whatever, they just called him by his name
Oh my Lord.
uh, or brother. He never he never rose to be pastor in their
Pastor
mind. You know what
or
I'm saying?
Reverend so and so.
No, they just it was a bit demeaning. Oh, like I said, although I was very young, I did
You
recognize that.
remember that.
Yes, my
And you
mother.
remember that.
Yes, my mother bought us volumes of Black history encyclopedias so we could learn
Wow.
about our Black history because it was not taught in the schools. Because I was subjected to racism in that town a few
I
times.
can only imagine.
Yes, and so was my father. My father, um, he worked in he did construction work, but then after he retired, he did some work, yard work. And I remember going to one of his jobs one day, and he was speaking to a teenage um, Caucasian boy,
Yeah.
and he was saying Mr. Mike, but he called my daddy by his first name. I was very upset about
Wow.
that, but my daddy handled it quite well. My daddy was a World War II veteran. He knew how he was subjected to racism, even in the military. But I do want to say this, that I believe that what we're learning through this class is is good, and I think this is why the critical race theory thing is so big because it will expose
Yep.
more of who they are to their children, but it also will expose who our greatness to our children. And
And
I think
who
they
we
don't ever
are.
want us to know that what they show on TV, that that the Africans were not a bunch of people came here ignorant. They were not
Right.
ignorant, half naked,
Right.
barbaric people like they portray. That we were smart people, and they stole
Brilliant.
so much from us.
Smart
But
people.
anyway, I wanted to say that, and I had a chance to visit the museum in Detroit, the African uh, History Museum in Detroit, and I think that
Okay.
everybody should go there. It's one of the best and most beautiful places you can visit. It has history, history exposed, and it's black. It's black owned. So yes, so it's beautiful. And thank you for
Thank
this
you.
class, Miss Berry. It's very
Thank
knowledgeable. Thank you.
you. Thank you. Thank you. Miss Gloria, I saw your mic open.
Yeah, I was going to say, as I was reading this, what came to mind was that money is the root of all evil because the slave masters, they had to change the Bible and the gospel because they wanted money. That's the only reason.
Economics. We got to keep these crops going, right?
Yeah, and so it always goes back to the Bible. It was the root of all evil, and we know that our slavery system was evil.
Yeah, the love of money. The love of money.
The love of
Uh,
money is the root of all evil.
and getting folks to work, not paying them, and definitely not taking care. We didn't have to be here. We were fine. Could have left us alone. But but now you want our ancestors to come over here and work for free? No. And then let me say this. I know we keep moving. This is such a rich chapter, y'all. Remember, Miss Janice talked about the church coming over to her church and sitting separate. If you flip over one more page, there's a chapter, excuse me, the paragraph, it starts with the mobility and worship involvement. And I'm gonna stop here. It says predetermined seating arrangements relegated slaves to, remember I said balconies, back rows, spaces outside the church building, near the back windows, or wherever the persons in charge indicated. To truly isolate slaves, churches are known to have dug pits just below the pulpit for the crowding in of Black
Wow.
worshipers. Dug pits.
Young people think this stuff happened years and years ago, but most of your parents and grandparents, at least, were alive during this time. When went to Mississippi, we went to the movies. We had to go to the balcony. We paid with everybody else, and then we walked around the thing and went up the stairs to the balcony. you know So it hasn't been that long.
Hasn't been that long. No,
It hasn't been that long.
hasn't been that long. All right, I'm gonna be quiet. This was so good. Y'all keep reading this book, and we're not gonna finish all of this book, but I just encourage you to read it for yourselves. And I'm sure that you all, after the course is over, share it in your uh, um, places of worship. It's a real eye opener. All right. Any questions, comments for me before we go?
I just want Miss Janice was John Lewis from Troy?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, my first cousin married his brother.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
All right. And there's a university there as well, right? In Troy, Alabama.
Troy, right.
Yes, yes. My sister worked there in admissions for years. Troy
Oh,
University.
Troy
Yes,
Troy.
University.
yes.
Mhm. It's a big school.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
It's a small world.
Yes, it is. We keep talking. We're gonna know somebody on here. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. I always enjoy being with you. You all have a blessed day. Don't forget your paper. Um, I know we're pushing it. Your case study paper for due on Sunday. Okay.
Okay.
All
Okay.
right. And
Thank
Reverend
you.
Marshall, if I don't see you next week, I will be talking.
Okay. Thank
Okay. Okay. Take care
you.
now.
See you.